The good old chuck roast. Humble and flavorful when properly prepared, but kind of boring, right? Well, not today. Today, we are remaking this beauty into 4 different flavor-packed recipes. Not only will this keep you out of a rut in the kitchen, but it will also help you stretch that roast further than ever before, making it a budget win for you. To get this day started, we have to prepare the roast. Now, most typically, I grew up with a roast in a crock pot, which turns out absolutely delicious, fall apart, fork tender, just like this one's gonna turn out as well. But it takes all day to slow cook. Recently, I upgraded my Instapot to be large enough to where I can put a big roast down in the bottom. So today, I'm gonna show you exactly how I prepare a roast in the Instapot in a fraction of the time. Now, the first thing I did was set this to saute. I got the oil heated up and I'm searing off the roast in the bottom of the pot. Once you have it seared on every side, go ahead and add enough beef stock to cover the roast completely. Set your lid to sealing and go ahead and add an hour and 5 minutes for a little over a 2-pound roast. It can go up to 80 minutes if you have a 5-pound roast. So just depending on the size, it'll depend on how long you want to cook it. If you are starting from frozen, then you won't sear it and you will add more time to take care of it, but you can still go ahead and process a frozen roast in the Instapot. For me personally, I like the texture and the flavor that comes from a seared meat, so that's how I process this one. Once that was done, you can see exactly how tender it is. It just falls apart. It is perfectly done, beautiful, and it did not take 8 to 10 hours like it would have in the crock pot. With the price of a roast being what it is currently at the grocery store, I decided I did not want to sit down for a roast, carrots, and potatoes meal with my crew because this entire cut of meat, which would cost around $20, would be gone in no time. Instead, I decided to remake it 4 different ways. And to do that, what you have to do is make sure you're not cooking this up at mealtime and you can keep your crew away from the cutting board once you start the shredding process. My kids absolutely love roast. I have a couple that are very meat heavy and they would have taken it down just like that. So I shooed them out of the way and went ahead and got to work on our first recipe. We're starting off with a wild rice and beef soup. Now, this is going to start out just like most soups do. Carrots, onions, and celery all cut up. I'm going to saute those off in some butter, let them get really nice and soft, and then continue adding the extra ingredients. Now, I do prep the majority of my produce from fresh, but if I'm going to take the time to purchase it, buying something like already prepared frozen carrots is a huge time savings for me, and anytime I can cut out an extra step, I love to do so. I also went and looked for fresh mushrooms at my grocery store, but they were totally out. So canned it is, and I have to tell you, it makes life a little bit easier. There was no flavor loss or problem associated with doing that, so I love to keep things like canned mushrooms around just for cases like this. To the pot, I added the shredded beef as well as a couple tablespoons of ketchup, a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, and then I'm getting it blended up here. Now, the secret is when you add the wild rice to the pot, you want to make sure that you've rinsed it first. Getting it fully cleaned off will ensure that you don't have a gummy, thick soup. And then you want to slow cook it barely a simmer for about 40 or 50 minutes until that wild rice gets fully softened. My wild rice had actually been up in the cabinet for quite some time, so I was really thrilled to be able to get rid of it. It was actually about the perfect amount for this recipe. It called for a little over a cup of wild rice, so cleaning out anything that I have sitting around is always a big win for me. At the end, once the rice is complete, adding a half cup of cream is the perfect way to finish it off. Now, the flavor that comes from the soup is absolutely amazing. It's very rich. It's very, very flavorful. I will say my husband and I absolutely loved it. I decided the only thing that it needed was a bread bowl. For my kids, they wished it didn't have the wild rice. My boys said absolutely make it again, but leave out the wild rice. So we'll see how that goes in the future. But I think this is the absolute perfect meal for a cold, nasty, snowy day, which is exactly what we have here right now in Missouri. Now, usually after lunch, I will move into a little bit of dinner prep, which is what I'm doing right now. If I can get something started before I take my little one up for nap time, the whole evening goes way smoother. So I'm starting off with some pita bread. Now, this is a recipe that I had not used before, so I used it just as written with bread flour instead of using my freshly milled flour. I wanted to make sure that I could nail this recipe before I converted it, and make sure that it was something my crew would love before I take the time to invest in making those changes. If you've been following my channel very long, you know that bread is something that I've really been investing in this year. My goal is to not purchase any store-bought bread, and this is just another step in that direction. I actually have a video planned for that next week, giving you my full bread routine to show you exactly how we've been able to nail things like sandwich bread and homemade hamburger buns to the point where my crew is begging me not to go to the store to get bread instead of the opposite like they used to. Now, while I was actually finishing this up, my doorbell rang. Upon further investigation, it was one of my favorite UPS guys out on this nasty, nasty day, so I didn't have to be. And he brought one of my favorite deliveries of the month. While I need to get my sweet little one down for her nap, she's outside enjoying the snow. So I'm going to bring you along as I put away my monthly ButcherBox order. And while I do, I'd love to chat with you about meat sourcing. Quality is a hot topic all over the country these days, but it's also a really, really important emphasis here for me. What we eat matters, and that's why I find such value in this customizable box of meat, which I have delivered straight to my door once a month. Now, if you've been around my channel for any length of time, you know that we purchase beef in bulk. So why would I need a monthly butcher box? For one reason, variety. I can't find organic chicken thighs, breast, or wings anywhere close to my house. I also can't easily find wild-caught seafood. But one of my favorite reasons that I use ButcherBox is to fill in the gaps at the end of our freezer beef before we replenish. Being able to grab the highest quality chuck roast and steaks while we finish our remaining cuts, which are typically just ground beef, has been a game changer for diversifying as we head toward our huge freezer restock. I know that many of you freezer beef families know exactly what I'm talking about. I also love that one pack of chicken gives me 2 to 3 meals worth of meat because they come in 3 separately packaged sections for easy storing. I've been amazed with just how far one bag can go. If you're interested in the highest of quality, like grass-fed, pasture-raised beef, organic chicken, humanely raised pork, and wild-caught seafood, then make sure to check the link in the description and use my code HOMETOWN to add an additional $40 off your order on top of free chicken breast, ground beef, or salmon in every box for a year. And thank you again to ButcherBox for sponsoring today's video. With my little lady asleep, I snuck back downstairs to go ahead and get started on the tzatziki sauce for tonight's hero. Now, if you are not familiar with tzatziki or Greek food in general, we are making a sauce with grated cucumber, yogurt, lemon juice, garlic, and a few seasonings to top it off. Now, this comes together really fast. It is really beautiful, but I will tell you, it had me craving summer so bad by the end of the day. I'm sure I'm not alone, but as we sit right now with snow covering the ground and just the cold nastiness of winter, all I can think about are the seeds I have going in the basement and moving into the gardening season. That didn't help at all when I went to the store and bought a cucumber and tomatoes, which I will admit I have not done in years. I typically only eat in season around here, but my son saw this recipe and was super jazzed for the idea. So I made an exception and threw this one together. And speaking of my family, I'm going to take just a little bit to tell you about myself because I haven't introduced myself in a few weeks and I have a lot of new faces around here. So for those of you who are new, my name is Jill. I'm a homeschooling mom to 5 kids, ages 3 to 11. We do all things homemade and homegrown with an emphasis on keeping the budget low while still eating the highest quality foods possible. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hang out because I think you'll love what we have to share. Now, jumping back to the pita pockets that I'm making, the recipe said it would make 6 pockets at 75 grams each, but what I found was that I had a little bit left over at the end, which works out perfectly. We are a family of 7, so we ended up with 7 pockets out of this specific recipe, which I will make sure to leave down below. I cannot overstate the importance of learning how to make your own bread if really nailing down your budget is a priority, but I will break down the figures on that for you next week when we jump into our bread making process. Jumping back to the pita, once I got all of the basic ingredients together, I let them sit until doubled in size, which can take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, just depending on how cold your kitchen is. Then at that point, you want to go ahead, break it apart into the evenly sized dough balls. Let them sit for about an hour to double, and then go ahead and start shaping them out, which we'll do here momentarily. During the second rise, this is the time I went ahead and prepared the remaining ingredients. While the cucumber went into the tzatziki sauce, the lettuce and tomato do need to be prepared because you're going to put those straight onto your pita bread. Now, because these are store-bought tomatoes, I went ahead and made sure to really give them a thorough cleaning. I like to do this with a solution of vinegar and water, and I will make sure to put in the cards up here or in the description down below my actual vegetable cleaning recipe for anyone who's curious. I like to just wash everything up at once when I bring a big batch in, and it really saves a lot of time and ensures that you're giving your family very, very clean produce. Now we're back to the pita bread, and I am rolling these out on a metal cutting board instead of on my counter. Most typically, I will just do it straight on the counter, but what I've found, because my counter is textured, it's actually a leathered granite instead of a smooth surface, that things tend to get stuck in the little grooves in the texture and they don't roll out super smooth. So I've been trying out this metal cutting board for a week or two and I'm really loving it so far. I also use it for meat instead of using a plastic cutting board. And I know they say that wood is the way to go and that it's more antimicrobial than we might imagine, but I can't bring myself to put raw chicken on a wooden cutting board. So anyway, long and short, this is working great for my bread as well as for my meat. Now, as you can imagine, any opportunity to work with dough is going to bring one of my kiddos to the kitchen. My older son loves to help me roll up our actual sandwich loaves, and this little lady could not pass up the opportunity to roll out her own pita for tonight's dinner. Perhaps someday in the future, she will be my own expert pita baker here at the house, but for now, it is, of course, under my watchful supervision. While it does slow me down just slightly, I always enjoy the time that I spend with the kiddos in the kitchen. In an effort to not leave dough spread out all over the counter, I did pull out some parchment paper circles that I actually purchased pre-cut. That allows us to stack up all the dough as you see there, and it also makes it super easy to transfer them over to the oven. Now to get these baked up, I have a baking stone cookie sheet in my oven that's been preheated to 450 degrees for probably like 30 minutes. It needs to be very hot. If you can go 475 or 500 on your stone or whatever vessel that you're baking on, that would be good as well because it'll bake up a little bit faster. The top temperature on these stones that I use is 450 degrees, so that's where I stopped for the meantime. But as you can see, they puffed up really beautifully. Now, to push these in super easily, a pizza peel is suggested, but I'm just using a cutting board that I properly floured. It slides right off onto the baking sheet, and then within about a minute, they really start to puff up nice and beautiful in the oven. After about 2 minutes on the first side and 1 minute on the second, these are ready to go. Because you have to bake them individually, there is a little bit more hands-on time with pita than a traditional bread, but it bakes up so fast that it really doesn't turn out to be that big of a difference. I did 7, and that took me about 20 minutes total, but in the meantime, I just went ahead and started cleaning up the kitchen. Now, if you're familiar with Heroes, you know that they often have French fries in them. Now, this isn't something that I typically make at home in this way. Most traditionally, I like to bake off my French fries in the oven, but after watching some YouTube content and figuring out the best way to make these French fries to get the utmost crunch possible for the texture inside the Hero, I decided to go ahead and fry them up. I fried them up in some of the tallow that we rendered together a few weeks back, and I didn't tell my husband about this because he was gone at basketball practice at the time. When he came home and put his together, the first thing he asked me was what in the world was up with the fries, and I wasn't really sure if that was a compliment or a complaint, to be honest right off the bat. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? He's like, these are the best fries I've ever had. Like, what did you do to them? What is different? So it did make a little bit of a mess on my kitchen counter, but I had actually had that cast iron chicken fryer for quite some time and never used it. And I'm talking like 2 or 3 years. It was actually a gift from my mother-in-law. I just don't fry stuff, so I typically use different vessels. But I think after the results that we have with these fries, we might be doing this a little more often now that I have that home rendered tallow ready to go. To finish off your gyro, just pile it all up. I did forget to add the feta in that shot. I went back and added some feta on mine after I'd eaten half of it. It was amazing. Everybody was super happy with those. This will be a repeat. It'll probably be a summer staple. I will be making up some of those pita breads in the future just to put them in the freezer to have them ready anytime we need them because they were a really big hit. So they'll soon be a part of a big batch baking day. Now, moving on to the next recipe, this one is so simple. All I'm going to do is make some beef and cheddar sliders here for my crew. I pulled out some buns that I made from last week's bread dough. I mean, this will change your life. There is no more need to go to the store and buy buns here at our house, but I had to stop in the meantime and help my little lady get her babies on. I used to baby wear all of my littles, so my girls just think that's what mamas do. So jumping back to the recipe, all I'm doing is cutting these buns in half, putting some mayo on. Now, typically, I should say, I make all of our mayo at home, but for some reason we had a little bit of this one left. So I'm just getting this bottle out of my house once and for all. I have found that if you toast bread up with mayo instead of butter, it gets a lot more crunchy. So that's why I've moved to this many, many years ago. Once they are all mayoed and ready to go over to the griddle, all you have to do is put them on for a couple minutes until they get lightly browned. This is one of those quick and easy lunchtime recipes that will take you minutes to prepare. I would recommend, if you're going to do something with roast and you don't want to eat it this many days in a row, throw a portion of it in your freezer to pull out for recipes just like this. If you make some buns every week when you're making your bread and throw them in the freezer and you have some of that beef left over, this is literally a meal in minutes and it is absolutely delicious. Now, I am slicing some raw cheddar, but that's just personal preference. If you want to make a cheese sauce, more of like an Arby's beef and cheddar, you could do that as well. I just like the clean simplicity that comes along with it. And I'm partnering it with some of those air fryer vegetables that I made in the upload just a couple days back. If you're looking for quick and delicious, super easy air fryer sides, make sure to go back and check that one out. It's just crazy what you can do in the air fryers these days, and it really makes cleaning up in the kitchen a breeze. Now, as you can see here, my little one, she didn't really want help. She wanted to do it all herself, but Big Brother did step in to help. Those sandwiches were inhaled by the kids, and aside from the vegetables, they would be great served with some nice chips or just any of your quick and easy classic side dishes. Now, moving on to the fourth and final recipe that we're making with this chuck roast. It's going to be done in the amount of time it takes to boil noodles. We are making a cheeseburger pasta. To get started, I'm shredding up 8 ounces of shredded cheddar cheese. Of course, you can cut out this step by just buying a pre-shredded cheese. For me, it is about the texture of the cheese. I don't find that it melts as well once it has the starch on there that prevents it from sticking together in the bags. So I like to use this raw cheddar that we purchase from Azure every month. And then I'm just able to shred it up as needed. Or sometimes when I'm meal prepping, I will shred the whole 5 pounds, put it in the freezer, and then just pull it out as needed. I find that shredded cheese actually does freeze super well, and it just makes for convenience at mealtime. So that's kind of a personal thing, whatever works best for your crew. Right now, I'm shredding as we go. But again, once I start a big bulk day, I'll probably shred up another 5 pounds. Aside from shredding the cheese, that's actually the bulk of my prep for this one since that chuck roast has already been prepared. So I'm getting my water ready to go. I am doing 1 pound of penne pasta. You can use the pasta of your choice. We have a couple different pastas that we purchased in bulk over the last year, and so I just let my kiddos pick out the shape that they want for that particular day, and we go from there. I do weigh this out because the recipe called for 1 pound. Since I'm making a sauce to go with 1 pound of pasta, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't over or underdoing the amount of pasta going in. I find that a kitchen scale, aside from even baking uses, is really invaluable. So if you're not weighing stuff out, I highly recommend it. It just makes everything so much easier and more precise at the same time. So once the penne is going, I am warming up the shredded beef over on the side. Now, let me tell you, you can do this with ground beef. And if you're looking for a chunkier texture in your final result, I would recommend that. If you have kids that are kind of not interested in meat, which I have a couple of those too, using something like this that's going to more melt into the final product of the sauce will be helpful. So it just depends on your specific kiddos, what's going on there at your house. To the pot, I'm adding an 8-ounce block of cream cheese, which I did kind of cut into portions so it melted a little bit more quickly. I also added maybe 2 tablespoons of that stock that came out of the Instapot from cooking the roast to help it kind of start to melt easier and incorporate a little bit better. To help that melt and get fully incorporated, I went ahead and put a lid on it for just a couple minutes to let everything kind of melt in, and it turns into this really thick, beautiful cream. Now, that's a little bit thicker than you want to go on top of your pasta, so we're going to go ahead and season it up before adding some liquid to thin it down just a little bit. Salt, garlic powder, and onion powder are the secret. That's really all that you need. Make sure to taste and adjust your seasonings, and then you're going to slowly start to incorporate about a cup of milk. You can make this as thick or thin as you like. If you like a more runny sauce, you can add a little more. And of course, if you like a thicker sauce, don't add quite so much. I'm using a raw milk that we pick up from a local farmer, but you can just use whatever you have. I do feel like a whole milk is better for a sauce than a skim milk or even a 2%, just for the creaminess that you're looking for. So in the past 20 minutes, we've cooked a chuck roast and remade it 4 different ways. If only it came together that fast in the kitchen, right? I want to thank you for spending your time with me today, and don't forget to check out that link for ButcherBox down in the description below, and I'll see you back soon. Bye, friends.